You're listening to episode 194 of Lifestyle Locker Radio with Dr. Cyrus Khambatta. Hi, I'm Dr. Josh Handt, and I want to welcome you to Lifestyle Locker Radio. It is here where we talk all things lifestyle, from fitness to nutrition, peak performance to longevity, awesome relationships to inspirational stories. We take you on an amazing journey to all things life and lifestyle. Enjoy the ride. And for today's guest, I urge you to scroll down, check out the show notes, check out all their detailed links to learn more about them. But I can promise you this, you're gonna learn a ton about them in this show. We also encourage that you comment, review, and share this show if you are enjoying it from wherever and whenever you're listening. Lastly, we encourage you to check out all the links that we provide in the show notes. They are there for you, for your health, for your lifestyle. We ultimately want you to unleash your human potential. So dive into this episode. We'll see you on the inside. Hey everyone, welcome back to Lifestyle Locker Radio. We have a returning guest. You heard him on the last episode. This is Cyrus Khambatta. Dude, welcome back. I'm pumped to have this conversation again. Another great conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. My cat wants to join us as well, so hopefully.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they'll have the cat will have some great conversation as well.
Yeah, she's very knowledgeable. Let me tell you.
So we spoke quite a bit about your story, about performance, about food, and some of the statistics with type 1 and type 2 diabetes on the last episode.
For
So
sure.
let's get into some of the science, because some people have a little bit of an idea, based on your story. But let's see, what are there factors that can cause type 1 diabetes?
Yeah, right. So there's sort of two different classes of diabetes. There's type 1 diabetes, and then there's pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes, right? Type 1 diabetes is considered an autoimmune condition. And so, just like I explained in the previous episode, I was diagnosed with that when I was 22. Mm-hmm. And the nature of an autoimmune condition is that your own immune system is basically causing the destruction of various cells in your body that are required for any particular biological function. So in the case of type 1 diabetes, my immune system attacks and kills the beta cells inside of my pancreas, and as a result of that, it cripples my ability to secrete and manufacture insulin. So what that means is that I can no longer manufacture, secrete insulin, and that's a problem because you take any animal, whether it's a monkey or a dog or a cat, and you eliminate their insulin production ability, and they'll be dead within a month to 2 months. So
wow.
It's critical. It's absolutely critical for life. Mm. And so in the case of people with type 1 diabetes, they have to basically we have to learn how to inject insulin and how to inject insulin to control our blood glucose. But then the trick is also to inject approximately the same number of units as you would have as your pancreas would have manufactured if you were non-diabetic. And what ends up happening in the world of diabetes is that people don't know that going into it. And so they start injecting, let's call it 20 units a day today. And then over the course of time, 20 becomes 30, 30 becomes 40, 40 becomes 60.
Wow. So they're just increasing.
Generally speaking, there's a increase in insulin requirements over the course of time. And a lot of that is dependent on the food that you put into your body. No questions asked. But the idea here is that if you get to a point where you're injecting more insulin, significantly more insulin than your pancreas would have normally secreted, then there's excess insulin in circulation, and that can then increase your risk for many other chronic diseases down the road.
Oh, interesting. It's unbelievable. So, and how do they figure this? How do you figure out, say, great, I'm Cyrus, I'm a plant-based guy, I need X units versus John or Jane Doe, modern American that's eating, fast food and all sorts of stuff. And how do you figure that out?
How do you know? Okay. So the simple calculation here would be you take let's do you right now. Okay. How much do you weigh in pounds?
190.
So you weigh 190 in pounds. Okay. So you divide that by 2.2 to get your weight in kilograms. So 190 divided by 2.2 is what, 80 something?
Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay. We'll just say 80 for the sake of argument. Okay. So you're 80 kilograms. What your endocrinologist may do when you first get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes is they'll take that number 80 and they'll multiply it by 0.6. So 80 times 0.6 gives you a number of 48. And that would mean that your endocrinologist would say, okay, on average, if you were to inject approximately 45, 48 units of insulin per day, that would be considered quote unquote healthy, right?
Okay.
And that's sort of just a metric they use to figure out what your pancreas would have normally secreted if you were non-diabetic. The thing is that number is highly, you can easily change that number. So again, what we don't want to do is get to a point where you're over-secreting, you're over-injecting insulin and injecting 60, 70, 80, 90 units a day, which can easily happen. Instead, it would be better if we could take that number of 48 and drive it lower, but not to zero. The goal is to get that number closer to something like 25 to 30 to 35 units per day, right?
Okay.
Now, the question is, well, how can you do that? How can you drive down the number of units of insulin you use? And there's basically like two primary methods to do that. Number one, you can adopt a low carbohydrate diet. Low carbohydrate diet being like a paleo diet or a ketogenic diet. Those are the sort of like super popular low carbohydrate diets now. The second option is to adopt a plant-based diet. So the question really becomes, okay, well, if I can do it in one of two ways, then like which one's better, right? And if you look into the research, I mean, I'm a research nerd, so I just go into the research and I read things for fun because I think it's interesting. And when I first transitioned to a plant-based diet, the reason I did it was because I felt very low energy on a carbohydrate restricted diet. I felt low energy. My joints were hurting. My muscles were hurting. I could not be as active as I wanted to be. I'm used to, just like you, I'm used to using my body 7 days a week.
Yep.
And, I push my body hard. And I was noticing that I wasn't able to push nearly as hard. In addition to that, my glucose was very variable and my insulin use was climbing over time. So when I made the transition to a plant-based diet and then started digging into the research, what I found was very interesting, which is that even though you can lower your insulin use in both the low carbohydrate and the low fat, sort of low fat plant-based setting, they have similar short-term results, but in the long term, the results are drastically different. Okay. In the long term, people who eat low carbohydrate diets, the research shows that low carbohydrate diets is associated with increased chronic diseases like increased heart disease, higher cholesterol levels, increased risk for Alzheimer's and dementia, increased risk for fatty liver disease, increased risk for chronic kidney disease. Okay, so low carbohydrate leads to increased risk for, I'll put chronic disease as a whole.
Oh, interesting.
Low fat, plant-based whole food diet decreases long-term chronic disease risk. And that's where this light bulb in my head went off, where I was like, wait a minute. We can certainly manipulate your glucose to your advantage and your insulin use to your advantage today. But the question is, can we do that and keep your chronic disease risk low 20 years into the future? And if so, from what I've read and from what all the research that we've gone through, the low-fat plant-based whole food diet tends to be the most effective approach for keeping your chronic disease risk low into the future.
So that's so weird because I'm not a research nerd. I think it's great. I'm glad there are people like you that love to dive into stuff, and then I get to have these conversations.
Sure.
But I've had so many great conversations with very smart people like yourself, and for me, it's like my head feels like it's going to explode because then I hear it's like keto, or paleo. And when they go through those stuff, it registers in my head and I go, okay, that makes sense. Right. Like then I hear I shouldn't say the opposite. We'll hear plant-based as one. Then we'll hear, you're the first as plant-based and then low fat.
Oh yeah. Okay, great. Right. So then I threw another variable in, which is
I'm like, oh my God. I mean, I mentioned this on the last episode, and this is why this is interesting to me because as someone, I would say I'm a higher performer, like when I use my physical body, even when I use my brain, then we'll just say the average person. Mm-hmm. Like when I go plant-based, I feel like Superman. Like I said the last time, high octane, like I feel like I'm on high octane fuel.
Right.
But I'm not low fat, because I'm, and I don't measure my fat. So I don't know if it's considered, I don't think it's low, but I'll have coconut oil, I'll have avocado oil or avocados. Mm-hmm. And I usually have that with all of my food. Mm-hmm. And some of them may be fatty foods. Is that detrimental?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked this question. Let's address two things. Number one, the world of diet and nutrition is way too complex. It is an absolute circus. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
So you have people who come on and talk about a low carbohydrate diet, a ketogenic diet, a plant-based diet, a low fat plant-based diet, a plant-based ketogenic diet. And before you know it, you're like, wow, it seems like even the, quote unquote experts can't agree with each other. Right. And most people, what I found is that they have a profound personal experience that then influences the way that they think. And then as a result of that, they go and they look for more information about it. And then they find information to back up their own personal experience. Right. I would put myself in that same category, but I've also, over the course of time, made it a really strong objective of mine to try and be as unbiased as possible and say, okay, fine. I have a very profound personal experience in adopting a low fat, plant-based whole food diet, but maybe that doesn't necessarily apply to other people. Right. And so I've been like constantly looking for more information. And I'm telling you, as I go through the research and as I read and read and read, what I find is that a lot of the research does back up the idea that number one, eating more plants is beneficial for long-term health. And that number two, monitoring and controlling your fat intake is also very important.
Okay.
So those are sort of two principles that I would say are very important to think about. And I sort of want people to understand that more over the course of time.
It doesn't mean no like fat though.
It's impossible to eat no fat.
Okay, good. Great. Thank you.
Okay. So when I say low fat, let's be clear here. When I say low fat, I'm talking about a diet that contains approximately between 10 and 15% of total calories as fat. Okay. So it's not zero. It's not 2%. It's 10 to 15%. And then when we're talking about medium fat, we'll go something like between 15 and 40% fat. And then when we're talking high fat, we're going to go 40% and higher. All right. So let's go back to your particular situation.
Yeah, I was probably medium would be my guess, but I don't know.
Medium. I would probably put you in the medium category as well, given that you're eating plant-based foods with oils and or avocados in it.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question really becomes, in order for you to get benefit, do you must be on a low fat plant-based whole food diet? It turns out that athletes are actually in a slightly different category than the general population. Okay. The general population benefits from driving their total fat intake down towards the 10 to 15% like we talked about. But for people who are extremely active, I'll put you in that category, I'll put me in that category, and I'll put people who are just using their bodies frequently, especially endurance athletes. There's this thing called the athlete's paradox. And the athlete's paradox is actually fascinating, which is that you train yourself to be able to actually utilize and store more fat inside of your muscle tissue than the average person can do. So in a nutshell, what ends up happening is that if you're eating like a medium fat diet, your average person, that medium fat intake is going to go, the fat is going to get stored inside of their adipose tissue. It's also going to get stored inside of their liver and their muscle. If you're not very active, the fatty acids that are then imported into your muscle, they end up living inside of your muscle for a decent period of time. It could be days, it could be weeks, it could be months, depending on how active you are. In someone like you, because you're active, because you use your musculature frequently, and because you're doing endurance-based activity, you can go eat a fat-rich meal. Those fatty acids can get stored inside of your liver and inside of your muscle. Literally, the next time you go exercise, you're going to use those fatty acids as a fuel depot. So effectively, what you're doing is you're absorbing and holding temporarily and then oxidizing. And because there's a shorter half-life of those fatty acids inside of your muscle tissue, you're protected against chronic diseases that other people may experience when those fatty acids end up living inside of their muscle tissue.
So now this makes a lot more sense that the athlete is actually saving their fuel so they can use it, because my next question that you already answered would have been, okay, great. I adopt this low fat diet, but I know as an athlete that's part of the high octane fuel that I need to like keep me going. And I tell people, I explain, like, to me, it's like like an oil candle versus a wax candle.
Yeah.
The way things burn, right? So I just burn slower, more efficiently. So I'm not like rocket up and then tank down. which I used to do, was I would just eat. I didn't care. Like, it didn't make a difference to me.
For sure.
But as I started to learn by testing that, I go, okay, I function way better. But that doesn't mean I'm not low carb during my race, right? I'm bananas and like I will have like nuts and seeds and things that are fatty during that, but I'm definitely not we'll say a low carb person during that night. And I feel, and my brain feels good too during these events.
Yeah.
So
Nor should you try and restrict carbohydrate intake when exercising, in my professional opinion, as well. So you're doing the right thing.
Okay.
Because those carbohydrates can not only be used instantly for rapid, conversion to ATP and energy, but they can also be stored inside of your muscle and liver as glycogen. And that glycogen is another fuel reserve that you're going to dip into as you're, performing exercise over the course of time.
That's great. So everybody, I mean, I hope everyone was just paying attention in that last 5 minutes. This is really, really powerful, right? You have to find out what category you're going to really fit in based on how you're going to use your fats, because it can be beneficial or it can be, what's the opposite of beneficial? Detrimental, right?
Detrimental. Yeah. Maladaptive.
Detrimental.
Sure.
So it could be, it could go either way. So, and if you change your lifestyle, you may have to change the way your eating lifestyle goes as well.
Absolutely.
Right?
I would highly
recommend.
recommend. For sure.
All right. So we got that. We got the low fat, plant-based. We got that for the type 1 diabetic, that it helps them monitor their insulin so they can keep their insulin use at a more lower level, right? More moderate level. So they're not overproduce or over injecting insulin. So we have that for type 1. What about, let's talk about like the pre-diabetic, you say, in type 2. I know that's more lifestyle based, but give us a little bit of like what is going on in a person, and how does it, and why does it actually start to show up in people's lives? And we're seeing it obviously in younger and younger and younger people.
For sure. Okay. So this question of like what causes prediabetes and type 2 diabetes is also a highly controversial topic.
Oh, okay.
And I think unnecessarily so. It's unfortunate that it's controversial, because the research is pretty straightforward about what causes prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, except the blogosphere and, people on Instagram and Facebook.
And Dr. Google, right? Like all of those things.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody likes to point at fingers. Oh, no, you're wrong. How dare you say this? You don't know what you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. And it can get frustrating. So if you look into the research, what you will find is that prediabetes and diabetes are caused by another condition. So the precursor to prediabetes is a thing called insulin resistance.
Okay.
So insulin resistance is the first domino. Okay. The second domino, if insulin resistance is present in your body, and then insulin resistance remains untreated over the course of time, and or it grows, insulin resistance turns into prediabetes.
Got it.
If prediabetes remains untreated or grows over the course of time, it turns into type 2 diabetes. So they're three dominoes, and they have to go in that order. You cannot go in any other order. Okay. So what that means is that type 2 diabetes is literally just an advanced stage of insulin resistance to begin with. Okay. And so what we want to do is we like to go back to the root cause and say, all right, well, what is this insulin resistance thing? What causes it, right? And again, if you look in the research, what you'll find is that the easiest way to create insulin resistance in your body is to eat a diet that is high in fat. Oh, now this may sound counterintuitive because people wait a minute, hold on a second. We're talking about
diabetes. I'm going to say, wait a minute, hold on.
Diabetes is sugar, Cyrus. What are you talking about? It's because you're eating too much sugar, too much carbohydrates, and that's what causes insulin resistance. The answer is no, and I can prove it to you actually. When I first started going to graduate school back in 2012, back in 2007, I studied for 5 years at UC Berkeley under the tutelage of one of the world's experts in carbohydrate biology. His name's Mark Hellerstein, and he's like literally a Goodwill Hunting. So when I was working with him, he basically gave me the task of trying to induce insulin resistance in laboratory mice and rats. And then once we created insulin resistance, we would then try and rescue them into being back into non-insulin resistant again, using either intermittent fasting, calorie restriction, or some form of exercise.
Okay.
So he said, okay, your task is to go find out how to induce insulin resistance in mice. He knew exactly how to do it. He just didn't want to tell me. So I had to go into the research, and I had to read and try and figure it out. here I am thinking the entire time, the way to induce insulin resistance is to feed them a high sugar diet. I'm going to either give them sugar, which is sucrose, or I'm going to give them a lot of fructose. And by doing so, I can make them insulin resistant. As I read more and more and more, it said, we made animals insulin resistant by feeding them a diet containing 65% saturated fat. It's like, wait, what? How's that possible? Next paper. We induced insulin resistance in rats by feeding them a hyperlipidemic diet, meaning a diet containing a lot of fat. You see this over and over and over again. High fat diet, high fat diet, high fat diet. And I'm sitting here scratching my head thinking, why are they feeding animals a high fat diet in order to create insulin resistance? I thought diabetes was all about sugar, right? So it turns out that the molecular mechanism is actually very interesting. And that is that when you feed animals a high fat diet, both mice and rats, and it turns out that higher level mammals are also in the same category, whether you're talking about dogs or monkeys or human beings. We all have very similar physiology. You feed an animal a high fat diet, and the fat basically goes into your digestive system. It then gets absorbed through the walls of your small intestine, gets into your blood. Fatty acids can get stored inside of your adipose tissue, your fat tissue, anywhere that it exists. It can also get inside of your muscle and liver. Now, here's the funny thing. If the fatty acids went only into your adipose tissue, then that would be a safe place for those fatty acids to live, and there really would be no problem. Diabetes may not even exist as a condition. So if fatty acids can go into adipose tissue, great, everything's fine, because the adipose tissue is specifically designed to absorb fatty acids when present, to hold on to them for long periods of time, and then to get rid of them when the time is right. It's got all the enzymatic machinery to do so. Now, majority of the fatty acids go into your adipose tissue. Some of those fatty acids make it into your muscle. Some of those fatty acids make it into your liver, and that's okay, as long as they're present in small amounts. But over the course of time, as you continue to eat a high fat diet for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, more for lunch, more for dinner, weeks, months go by, then your muscle and liver end up accumulating excess fatty acids over the course of time. So as these cells in your liver and cells in your muscle end up accumulating excess fatty acids, then what they try and do is they initiate this thing called insulin resistance as a self-protective mechanism. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to block more fatty acids from coming in, more energy from coming in. And they're saying, I don't want this stuff. I don't want this stuff. I have too much to begin with. The problem is they can't really block those fatty acids from coming in very well because the cellular mechanisms to do so are pretty junky. But what they can do is they can block insulin. And if they were to block insulin, then they can block glucose from coming in. And glucose is another very powerful energy source. And so they basically say, all right, well, we can't really block these fatty acids, but let's block insulin. And then by doing so, we can block glucose. So that's what they do is they start to pull back the insulin receptors on the cell surface. And they start to, rather than having thousands of insulin receptors on the cell surface, they pull back a number of them. And now there's only hundreds left over. And then as a result of that, some of the insulin receptors themselves on the inside of the cell become more dysfunctional. So what that means is that the next time you go eat something that's carbohydrate rich, let it be a banana or a bowl of quinoa, something that's even a whole carbohydrate, the glucose from those carbohydrate molecules circulates in your blood. Insulin comes in, knock, knock. Hey, muscle cell. Hey, liver cell. There's glucose in the blood. Would you like to take it up? And the muscle or liver cell says, no, no, no. Remember that whole insulin resistance thing that I created? I'm not going to take you up right now because I got to burn this lipid droplet first. So let me get rid of this lipid droplet, and then I can start to take up glucose. So as a result of that, the glucose gets trapped inside of your blood, and insulin gets trapped inside of your blood. And you're just like, damn it. Now I have high blood glucose. Now I have a lot of insulin in circulation. And the reason is not because I ate a lot of sugar or because I ate a lot of carbohydrate. In fact, I did the opposite. I ate a lot of fat to begin with. So what happens is that the fat-rich foods cause a traffic jam inside of your muscle and liver. And as a result of that, the glucose that comes in from carbohydrate-rich foods gets blocked. So what you really want to do is reverse engineer this situation to your advantage. And the way that you would do it is you say, okay, fine. The thing that caused insulin resistance to begin with was an increase or a high intake of fat-rich foods to begin with. So I'm not going to go to zero fat. That doesn't even make sense. I'm just going to lower my fat intake, again, closer to 10 to 15% of total calories. And as soon as you do that, then this insulin resistance problem inside of the liver and muscle cells begins to resolve itself within 24 to 48 hours. And you start to gain insulin sensitivity. And all of a sudden these cells are like, you know what? Let me start to burn this fatty acids that are inside of the cell because there's not that much coming in anymore. They start to burn that. And then all of a sudden, the next time you eat a banana, now the glucose comes by, insulin says, knock, knock, you want this glucose? And the cell says, sure, I'll take it. I'm cool. Bring it on.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. So that's literally, I mean, it's taken me years to like fully grasp this complex sort of puzzle that involves many different players. But it's truly, truly, truly a life-changing phenomenon. And that once people understand it, they can then manipulate their diet to their advantage and say, okay, I'm trying to reduce my total fat intake. And by doing so, I will gain the ability to eat more carbohydrate-rich foods. And by eating more carbohydrate-rich foods, you're gaining insulin sensitivity. And by gaining insulin sensitivity, you decrease your chronic disease risk into the future. Does that make sense?
This is like, my head's like spinning in like a million miles a second right now.
Good.
You know, I bet everybody listening is going to say the same thing. Mm-hmm. And only because, you know, I shouldn't say a promoter. I'm not a promoter of it, but I've always encouraged like I should say higher fat, like we'll call it moderate fat diet, just because it's worked really well for me.
Right.
And I've mixed things up. I've done keto. I've done all of this stuff, right? I've tested everything. But I haven't, here's the thing. And this would probably be the kicker. If I was doing this for 3 months at each of these things at 3 months at a clip, and I would do blood work at the, you know, beginning and end of each of these, would probably be the best. I would be the best lab rat for myself, which I can share with people, just because I felt that I worked really well with the, you know, the higher moderate fat diet, even when I was eating meat and all sorts of different things. But when I started racing and I was eating like a meal, like people like that are low carb would think I'm beyond insane. Like I think I may have said this last time, but it was sweet potatoes were roasted with like some coconut oil. So they got really like crystallized. They got really good. It got good sugar, good taste, pink salt. I'd have that. I have homemade refried beans, quinoa, and I'd have an organic white rice. And I would be one big pile of mash.
Yeah.
And it would be cool. It would all stirred together with a little bit of avocado oil, so nothing stuck to the pan. And that I would have a pile. That was my meal, multiple, I mean, like daily for like right before my big races. And now that my wife got on a kick of like, she did keto for like a week, lost a bunch of weight, feels like phenomenal. And now she wants to keep the low carbs. And she looks at me and she's like, how do you keep eating what you eat? Like, because I'll have dates and peanut butter for dessert, you know, with some applesauce. Like that's like a go-to for me with some coconut flakes on it. And she goes, you're not gaining weight. And you're having like, it's not this dates are you know, those aren't a low sugar food. They're like quite the opposite.
No, not at all. No, they're extremely high in glucose. And again, that glucose is a fuel. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we see this all the time. People that have this fear of eating carbohydrate-rich foods. You know, I don't know if your wife is necessarily afraid of carbohydrate-rich foods. I don't think she's
afraid. She just had a good result, right? Then experience.
There you go.
Right. So she's like, I need to keep doing this. Like that's the mindset is it worked for the short term. It must work for the long term.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the mindset that I think is actually somewhat
can be detrimental, right?
Yeah, exactly. If there was good long-term data in support of a ketogenic diet, then I would be much more favorable to it because again, you can get phenomenal short-term results and I will not take that away from anyone. But my qualm is that it actually increases. You look at the data from like anywhere from 6 months to 2 years of following a ketogenic diet. It does not look good. It does not look good. There was recently a paper published that shows 2 years of a ketogenic diet and 262 people eating a ketogenic diet living with type 2 diabetes. And I was very interested in reading this paper because I was like, what is going to happen? I want to know. And if you take a look at this paper, the individuals, even though they have improved their diabetic health, okay, their LDL concentrations, the bad cholesterol went up. Their total cholesterol went up. Their C-reactive protein, which is a high sensitivity C-reactive protein, inflammatory marker, is still elevated. Okay. And then in addition to that, their A1C is still in the type 2 diabetic range. They're still having a high fasting insulin, and their fasting glucose is still elevated. And I looked at this data and I was like, why do people not know this? This is dangerous, right? And that's just the diabetes side of things. That's all it is.
Yeah,
if you go into the heart disease side of things and you take a look at what's happening over the course of time, what you'll find again is that these low carbohydrate diets may improve your triglyceride values. They can come down for sure. It may increase your HDL values, no problem. But your LDL cholesterol pretty much always goes up, And anytime your LDL cholesterol goes up, that is cause for concern. In addition to that, blood vessels, there's this thing called flow-mediated dilation, FMD, which is basically a measurement of how well blood vessels can dilate in response to more blood flow. So you as an athlete, me as an athlete, like this is critical for performance. Because as soon as blood flow accelerates, if you cannot dilate a blood vessel, especially if it's a major blood vessel feeding a major tissue bed, a major muscle tissue bed, then that tissue cannot get delivered with oxygen, and it's a problem, right? So anytime you impair flow-mediated dilation, it's an indicator of worsening arterial health. And low carbohydrate ketogenic diets, there's papers that actually document their effects. And overwhelmingly, low carbohydrate diets, they impair flow-mediated dilation. So from the diabetes side of things, it doesn't look good over the course of time. From the cardiovascular side of things, it doesn't look good. There's also some data that shows that low carbohydrate diets can actually increase your risk for cognitive decline, which is Alzheimer's disease and dementia, right? And so you kind of put the whole thing together and you say, well, this might not be that good for my muscles. It might not be that good for my liver. It might not be that good for my vasculature.
For my body.
It might not be that good for my brain. So why the heck am I even doing it in the first place? Am I doing it just because it'll allow me to lose weight in the short term? Because if that's the answer, you can also lose weight eating a plant-based diet, and you can keep that weight off in the long term, and you can get benefits for your brain, for your liver, for your heart, for your muscles.
Oh, this is great. Yeah, no, I like you're getting my brain like this. Oh goodness. No, it's really good because it's for me, and I'm sure the audience, it's really just like a mind screw, but it's kind of opening the doors a little more. Like it's opening the door for me to go, okay, well, I'm not a researcher, right? But I said it already, but I think it's just creating like possibility because I want to live a long time. I want to be able to be active a long time. I don't want to, go great. I did all this great stuff that helped me short term, and now I'm screwed for the last 20 years of my life, like being
100%.
decrepit and broken down with whatever disease or condition or who knows what. I wouldn't mind running a marathon at 100 years old. I wouldn't, I wouldn't mind going for a swim, like 110, like doing things that are active and have a brain so I can have a conversation with someone.
Right. Exactly. It'd be nice to have a memory when I get older. That'd be what a crazy idea.
So, and I think this hopefully rings a bell for a lot of people to show that there is possibility. And so here's the question, but I'm going to get this question when this is live, is would doing for a short term, for vanity's sake, for someone, it's like, I want to lose 10 pounds in a short period of time. Could that be done plant-based, or is keto okay for a short period of time? And then you turn it to, right to where it needs to be, or is that just going to create too much fluctuation?
Okay. Good call. So the question, let's break this down. Number one, is it possible? We know that low carbohydrate diets and ketogenic diets are very effective weight loss tools. And that is probably the number one reason why people flock to it. Because it's a great way to lose weight, and you can lose weight rapidly. Okay. So the question is, can you also lose weight on a plant-based diet, right? Is it another effective way to drop body weight? And the answer is hell yes.
Okay.
Excuse my language. The answer is without question. It's not going to happen as fast as it would if you're eating a ketogenic diet. And I'll be the first person to tell you that. Okay. There's actually studies that show that the total weight loss, the rate of weight loss is faster. It's almost double on a ketogenic diet than it is on a plant-based diet. But here's the kicker. Ready? Even though you're losing more total weight on a ketogenic diet, some studies show that you're actually losing, you're not losing as much body fat. You're losing more muscle tissue, more lean body mass.
Oh, wow.
And that's very important to understand, right? So people who are in the low fat category end up losing weight less quickly and preserving lean body tissue. People who are in the ketogenic world end up losing weight faster, and they end up losing lean body mass faster as a result.
Oh, wow.
So that's important to understand. So that's number one. Secondarily, if you are adamant about wanting to eat a low carbohydrate or ketogenic diet, I can't stop you from that. Like, nothing I can say can stop you from that. What I would recommend doing is eat a ketogenic diet that is as plant-based as possible. And the way that you would do that is by eating a lot of non-starchy vegetables like carrots and broccoli and cauliflower and cucumbers and tomatoes and things like that. And eating avocados and nuts and seeds and coconuts and olives. Eat those foods as your fat source, as opposed to red meat, white meat, chicken, fish, eggs, and bacon. Okay? There's no question about it. That is going to improve your health, no question. But overall, as may be abundantly clear at this point, I'm a huge fan of a plant-based diet, especially if the plant-based diet has a lower total fat intake, because there's so many metabolic advantages in the short term and in the long term. And it would be, I would be misleading people if I were to tell them that the total fat content of your diet doesn't matter, because it absolutely does. And when you get the bulk of your nutrients from plant foods, you kind of get a double whammy. Low fat plus plant foods. That's sort of the best of the best in my professional opinion.
Yeah. So I would put a challenge out to everyone listening. If you're not a plant-based person at all, even a little bit, I would say everybody can do something for 1 week. Everybody can, right? Adopt, if you're an athletic, you may have that medium fat, like we said, but adopt that plant-based, like whole food. Like that's important as well. Not just packaged food, right? We don't want that stuff. We want whole food, real food.
Thank you.
Lower fat, and see how you respond. Give yourself a week.
Yeah.
Right?
Give yourself at least a week.
I'm just saying, like, you will feel like you may be detoxing nasty stuff out of your system that you've been holding on for a long time. So those first couple of days probably may not feel fantastic, even though you're eating real good quality food that's high in nutrients. But a week, I mean, I see a difference in a week. I shouldn't say I see, I feel a difference.
Yeah, that's different. Right?
That's very different. I feel a difference in a week. And I say, if you're someone that likes to push the envelope a little bit with your active lifestyle, you will love the way you feel. And more importantly, you will love the way you perform. Like that is for me. I mean, we had a pre-conversation about my injury that happened in October, end of October, and how, and I didn't say this to you before, but when I had to tap out because my knee pain was so bad, during that race, I was 100% plant-based, and, having like beans and all sorts of stuff with like my homemade granola was like dried bananas and nuts and seeds and coconut flakes and chia seeds and all these plant-powered foods. But I'd also have supplements which are made from plants like turmeric and ginger, which are high anti-inflammatories. But so here's the point. After I tapped out because of the pain and the injury, my energy level I was more pissed off that I got hurt because I wasn't tired. Like after 52.4 miles, I was not a tired person. It's incredible, isn't it? I was pissed off because if my knee wasn't jacked up, I would have kept going.
Right.
So, so that night I packed up the truck, my wife, we stayed overnight, and I drove home the next morning. Like she slept in the car, but I was a guy that ran 2 marathons. Right.
Yeah. That's incredible.
So the plant-based phenomenon, it's real. Like I've lived it. So I know it's real. I know you obviously, You practice and preach what you know, and you
No
teach,
question.
obviously, right? Like this is powerful.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you had that experience, because once you feel it, you cannot deny the experience that you have. Let me just talk about this here real quick.
Yeah.
This is a book that we just wrote called Mastering
Yeah.
Diabetes. Literally
Yes.
just came out last week. Okay. If you're interested in learning about the research that we just touched on here about insulin resistance and what causes it, this book has over 800 scientific references inside of it. And I'm actually going to send one directly to your house so that you can read this, and then you can like geek out on it as much as you
Awesome. Well,
want.
thank you. I will definitely read. I'm more than interested.
Cool.
You know.
Cool. And then for all the listeners that, whether you have diabetes or you know somebody with diabetes, or whether you're just interested in learning a little bit more about nutrition, go, check out the book Mastering Diabetes. You can buy it anywhere that books are sold.
Yeah. We'll share a bunch of links anyway.
Okay.
We'll plaster it everywhere.
Perfect.
So people are getting it. And you also have coaching through your website, right? People can access.
Exactly right. Yeah. So we designed our coaching program such that people who are looking to make a transition to a plant-based diet and get guidance and support along the way, are able to make that transition. And we just focus on people living with any form of diabetes, type 1, type 1.5, pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, gestational diabetes. And we have what seems like an unlimited number of, quote unquote success stories. And I'm not trying to brag by any stretch of the imagination. This is not about me. It's not about my co-founder, Robbie. This is literally about science. We're putting science to work for people living with all forms of diabetes. And the science speaks for itself. I mean, we have people who are losing 60, 70, 80 pounds over the course of 6 to 12 months. People getting off of pharmaceutical medication, people dropping their A1C down into the non-diabetic territory, dropping their LDL cholesterol, their blood pressure. The results are very, very promising. So if any of that is interesting to you as a listener, then go check it out, because there's a whole world of plant-based nutrition that is now becoming more popular. The science has been around for a long time. It's just a question of whether people are willing to adopt it and try it out. And just like you said, as soon as you do, you're likely to feel it. And that might be all the information you ever needed.
Yeah. So everybody, make sure you do, in the show notes, there's going to be links to everything he's talking about. We're going to put some great stuff. And when we're off the air here, we're going to make sure I have so much content for everybody to consume, the links to the book. But I mean, if he's got videos and things like that, we're going to connect you to all of the dots, right? All of his information, because this is something I'm going to dive into, and I'm sure this has piqued your interest. I have no doubt in my mind, because it's not anything you've heard before.
For
right?
sure.
For me, it wasn't. So I know a lot of our audience, I haven't spoke about it. So there's a high probability they haven't, but maybe they have. Maybe they already know who you are and have your book already, and
maybe
already, right?
awesome.
And I hope they do. So Cyrus, this has been awesome. And I know this is a conversation that we'll probably have off air again, because I'd love to get on a run with you, go train, maybe visit you in Costa Rica.
100%.
Right?
Anytime
all of these
you want.
really cool things, because our mission at Lifestyle Lockers is help people unleash their human potential. And that's why I'm so grateful to have someone like you on the show, because you are doing that, right? With your research, with your coaching, with you having experienced the things that happened in your life and able to come out of it as, like a superhero. Like I was able to rip off his shirt and have like that big S on it, because, right? Oh, if you think about it, and I'm saying that honestly, because people will have trauma in their life and they'll just put their head down and I have to deal with it. You found a way that it helped yourself, but also now how you can impact, right? We have 100 million, 130 million people between type 1 and type 2, something like that.
It's like 110 million.
110 million
living with
so
some
you have
form
the
of
potential
insulin
to
resistance.
impact that many people. And that's just in the US, right?
That's just in the US, exactly right. Which is scary.
Right?
Yeah, the numbers are even larger worldwide.
Exactly. So from Lifestyle Locker myself, I want to thank you so much. This has been an amazing 2 shows, and I can't believe how fast that time went. So
yeah, you're the man, Josh. Thank you for all you do. I mean, your podcast is really changing the lives of many people and forcing them to think about ways that they can manipulate their lifestyle to their advantage. And that's the name of the game, right? There's so many fad diets around, and so many supplements that an individual can take to, quote unquote, improve their health. But it's not until you really dig into the details and find out that they're not all created equal. So I appreciate all your effort in like trying to find the truth and really, giving people options for ways that they can improve their lifestyle. So thank you.
Well, thank you. There you have it again, Lifestyle Locker.